The return to school after distance learning has been a tough transition for students and staff, and we're seeing a growing need for mental health supports from students. They're struggling with being able to regulate their own emotions and their own bodies. We're struggling on how to create a system of support that meets what students need right now. This training today with Carlos Alvarez from the Los Angeles Institute for Restorative Practices will talk about what we know about brain science and how that translates to how we can support students in this new phase of education. Thanks for being here. This is the Resilience Impact Channel, and my name is Denise Moody, your host for this evening.
With everyone. Very excited of sharing this information that I'm going to be sharing today. Forensic psychology with an emphasis in psychotherapy. My undergraduate work has been in criminal justice with a specialization in child and family trauma. I've been a speaker for going on 7 years, speaker trainer. So my role is working with schools. I'm currently a school administrator now, working around discipline. Um, I work at New Worth at an Alliance school in South Los Angeles, where it's a full right brain school. So if anybody would like to come and see what we do, I'm definitely open to have you there. So just to give us a little bit of context, what are we going to talk about? Understanding that we're coming perfect. So we have, just to understand, we're all experiencing a what we are calling like a triple pandemic, right? A situation of COVID-19 and this whole situation of the post COVID-19. And what we've seen with that is a significant disruption of daily activity and daily routines for our scholars, specifically for our students. Coming to school, waking up, having that rhythm throughout the day has been significantly impacted. One of the elements that has also been significantly affected has been socialization. For scholars, developing social emotional learning, stamina, self-regulation is very highly dependent on socialization and the environment. So think about that scholar that would go into school, would meet with a pro-social adult, a counselor, will help that youth co-regulate, help their system feel balanced going to school. That has been impacted. Co-regulation is not existent when post-quarantine. I'm sorry, when quarantine was there. Post-quarantine is giving us some other elements. And what is this surface stress? We're seeing a lot of civil unrest in our side, community violence, communities in duress, the significant element of fear. Just in our side, LA has seen an increase in violent crime. We've seen about 343 homicides, a 34% increase from the previous year. What is this engaging our hypervigilance? We're very hypervigilant in our community, again, soliciting elements from our body that are taxing, and that are really not allowing us to be our true selves. And again, we see this element of stress. Then we see this big one, financial stability. And with a lot of our scholars knowing, for a lot of people in here, knowing that Maslow's hierarchy is very important, right? When Maslow's is gone, when we really can't think about robust academics, how can I achieve these grades, or how can I go into this, or agreements? It all comes into understanding what's happening in the present. We're seeing that unemployment is significant, it's still very questionable, basic needs are impacted. And displacement. For a lot of our scholars that were coming back into, a lot of parents lost work because of the pandemic. And what do we see? We see a lot of scholars get displaced, were sent to different uncles and aunts. And, because bills were heavy, and now we had to move from a 3-bedroom to a 1-bedroom, and it's restricting a lot of access. A lot of our scholars are coming in with this situation of adjustment symptoms, what are hindering a lot of the learning. And again, we see stress. Our impacts to mental health. So I'm going to allow about a couple of seconds for all of us to, you could go ahead and go with the whole slide. So we could go ahead and ground us in our conversation. So these are quick bullet point data points on impacts to our students' mental health, post-quarantine and quarantine. These are very alarming numbers. in regards to social emotional crisis, suicide ideation, for a lot of our counselors, for a lot of our school administrators, our disciplinarians, our teachers. Vital for us to understand what's coming from this whole situation. A lot of parents are coming in, and through what you just saw, we're engaging in parent conferences. We're engaging in conversations about behavior with scholars, different situations that we're identifying that might need a little bit more help. Parents are coming in with, my son or my daughter wasn't this way. Something happened. Yes, quarantine happened. A lot of that isolation, a lot of that disconnect, and parents are coming in not knowing what to do. This is causing severe elements of anxiety. We're seeing our scholars coming in, younger kiddos coming in with high levels of anxiety. And these levels of anxiety, where we're seeing them, what we're seeing now with the research is that anxiety is becoming younger and younger. We're seeing kids younger and younger get anxiety. It's genderless. We're seeing all of our kids, and a lot of the times we're seeing these behaviors get covered up as oppositional, as defiant behaviors, where we have to start understanding what's happening. Anxiety creates a lot of behaviors that are not welcoming for the child. We'll go with the next picture. For a lot of our scholars that can't receive the counseling intervention, therapeutic intervention, we're seeing these massive panic attacks. And these panic attacks is when the whole system has gone out of whack, right? When the mind is somewhere else, the body's somewhere else, and it's very chaotic. Now think about a 13-year-old child, a 12-year-old child, a 15, 16-year-old child engaging in these, in just feeling this way in school, right? It's very, very traumatic, very, very high, a lot of pressure for that scholar. What we've seen through these past couple of months that we've been back is that our scholars, of course, need high expectations, need academics. There's this very large conversation of missing lost academics. Let's make up for lost learning, But how about making up for lost love? And how about making up for lost comfort, nurturing? Our scholars, what we've seen is that through these months is that they need warmth, they need regulation, they need mirroring, they need support. And that's exactly how we're going to engage in this presentation. We could go ahead and go to our next slide. This is a profound statement that I use throughout the day. My wife is a clinician. She's also a disciplinarian, and she does, her earlier years was play therapy with kiddos. And she would come back and talk to me about like these amazing experiences that these child would develop with emotional intelligence. So I think this picture was accurate for this statement. The broader the sense of emotion that a child experiences, the broader the sense of life he or she will experience. And this is true. The broader the sense the child experiences with caregivers, with teachers, with adults, the broader sense of life he or she will live. Engaging in trips, engaging in a walk in the park, it's going to be just a lot better. Coming out of quarantine, and we could go into this slide. Coming out of quarantine, scholars face a greater risk of increased drug use. We've seen a lot more of vaping, covert vaping happening, lack of motivation, severe lack of motivation, increase of negative coping skills, high levels of anxiety. We're seeing extreme levels of anxiety, risky and impulsive behaviors, irritability, insomnia, and post-traumatic stress symptoms due to what quarantine is happening. A lot of the rhetoric that's happening, the news is happening. A lot of our kiddos have grandparents living with them, and just this scary situation is constantly with them. Why do we need to be trauma informed? And I know that a lot of us here are already trauma informed, but we just like to touch a little bit. Stress and trauma can both affect how brain functions, and we all know that. When we're stressed out, when we're dysregulated, our subcortical regions, our limbic regions ignited, significantly lessening blood for our frontal lobe. So we know that. This element of stress that's evolving, that's so monstrous in this situation. What is stress? A state of mental or emotional strain or tension resulting from adverse or very demanding circumstances. So stress is something that's happening and something that we live with. And if we could go into this slide, we have three types of stress. We start off with positive stress, tolerable stress, and toxic stress. So positive stress is important. These are normal spurts in our heart rate. This is us tests when we're waking up. I need to get to this meeting. I have a test. I have an assignment, etc. These are very important things to have.
Event.
Tolerable stress are serious temporary stress responses buffered by supportive relationships. Again, I want you to really focus on supportive relationships. Everyone experiences stress. It's how do we jump back up to a normal state? And then we go into our toxic stress, where we're seeing a lot of scholars who are exhibiting trauma symptoms that are already in the tolerable stress due to a lot of the situations happening at home, and elements at school or different social emotional deficiencies take a scholar to that toxic stress. So toxic stress is prolonged activation of stress responses systems in the absence of protective relationships. What is trauma? Individual trauma results from an event, series of events, or set of circumstances that is experienced by an individual as physically or emotionally harmful or life-threatening, and has lasting effects on the individual's function and mental, physical, social, emotional, and spiritual well-being. So threat to safety and survival. This slide here is very exciting for us. I work with a lot of schools around helping them understand why self-regulation is important, and changing the valence, changing the mindset, and not changing, maybe altering or influencing the mindset of teachers. I've worked with teachers for 12 years, 11 years, and with that is really influencing learning. This has helped me significantly with that. So what I want you to think about is what we're seeing here is antecedent experiences, adverse or positive, shape the biology of the brain. Think about your elementary scholars are a lot more, you're going to see a lot more of these behaviors, more raw behaviors. You're going to see a lot more covert behaviors in middle school, and you're going to see a lot more complexity in high school. How can stress impact the brain? Well, we've seen through our previous slides, we can go ahead and change slides. We have seen through our earlier slides how it's important for us to understand stress and its impacts. So what we're seeing here is our three major parts of the brain. We see the brainstem, and the brainstem is why are we focusing on the brainstem? This is the first element that's developing. So any insult when uteral, right, that the mother might experience, drug abuse, domestic violence, poverty, different elements can impact the brainstem development. We start seeing different elements that are state regulation. And if you want to do a little bit more homework around that, check out state regulation. And it allows you to understand what does this mean. The brainstem is not the smartest. It allows the body to just go on, and it sends messages to our central nervous system. We see also that our limbic system, which is solely focused around our emotions and focusing around our right side of our amygdala that stores our negative emotions, is consistently on and aware. We go into our prefrontal cortex, and that's where we want our scholars, we want everyone to be at, our prefrontal. Why? Because this is where the magic happens, where agreements, where restorative solutions. We can't build restorative agreements when we're in the brainstem, when we're thinking of aggression, of survival. Brainstem is very focused around that. If I would come in and I would, behind your door, just slam the door behind, like at the door, it would alarm you, like, is it a gunshot? What is going on? Immediately messages get sent through your limbic system, get sent through your prefrontal. Okay, it's a door knock. What was that? You start regulating. The brainstem is not the most intelligent, so it needs time to process. So some of the impacts of trauma, impacts of traumatic stress on emotional regulation. So trauma impacts an individual's ability to control and modulate and direct one's behavior, emotion, and thinking process. I went ahead and added a couple of pictures that are very focused around the K through 12 element. As a disciplinarian, I've seen a lot of scholars exhibit in different ways their dysfunction. Like when they're very impulsive or they need to, these fleeing behaviors, we see a lot of these punching of the walls. And this is something for us as practitioners to be a little bit more focused on. We're starting to see a lot more cutting, also very covert. So, covering, and these elements of cutting, these are moments of release, of understanding how this child has been so dissociated, has been in another element, and by cutting, they're brought back online. Very, very harmful, very toxic way of doing things, but a lot of our scholars are coming back to these situations. So what are restorative practices? So restorative practices empower scholars and adults to resolve conflicts and on their own and in small groups. And it's a growing practice at schools around the country. Essentially, the idea is to bring scholars together in peer mediate small group talk, ask questions about their grievances. It sounds very cool, right? This is very difficult to do. Very difficult to do with fidelity, very difficult to do with consistency without the proper training, the proper mindset, and the proper individuals. What we're talking about is restorative justice is missing a component, and missing a component in around how to help individuals build the container to internalize remorse, accountability, etc. So right brain restorative practices was developed, and it's a theory within the restorative justice gamut that allows, it's more of a central SEL model that really holds restorative outcomes. So right brain restorative practice is an implicit self-centered modality which evolved through elements of social emotional learning, humanistic psychology, and regulation theory. Right brain restorative practices are grounded on guiding and supporting an individual as they learn to build the container necessary to internalize remorse, gain insight, and empathically develop accountability and restoration. Very important. We could develop accountability. Hey, say sorry, and we could say sorry, right? But that those two individuals really mean it. Are we going to really get to the core of the situation? And this is what we're talking about. Right brain, what's the premise? So right brain practices aims to positively influence the valence and impact of opposing and or maladaptive behaviors that are impacting penal code or behaviors that are impacting school policy. Valence refers to whether the thoughts, feelings, or behaviors are negative, neutral, or positive towards the violation or infraction. Strength refers to the intensity and intrusiveness of the thoughts, feelings, or behaviors, and it can vary due to factors such as the perceived harm caused by the violation. Have we heard about in situations when I would work in restorative, doing restorative conferencing with inmates or with people that were coming out of prison, with victims, right, or victim offender dialogue? One of the conversations here, and one of the things that really stamps this is, I could forgive this person, but I can't forget. That's exactly what I'm talking about here. I forgive him or I forgive her, but I can't forget. You're lessening the intrusiveness, the thoughts, the feelings, the sensations of the situation, right? You're lessening that. However, you're building complexity of the situation. That is very difficult. And through restorative and right brain practices, we're able to do that and help scholars change their valence around. That teacher hates me. That's why she's sending me to the dean's office constantly, because of my phone. We know that the phone, we know that uniform are big issues, but these are little things that we have very acute conversations and able to change mindset. We engage in right brain to right brain dialogue conversation that supports individuals in building self-awareness. And we do alter the valence from negative to either neutral or positive during that conversation, or changing both the valence and strength of the reaction, which we send a scholar. A scholar might get sent out, some behavior, some situation. We're able to follow a recipe that we engage in, and we're able to change mindset and send the scholar back in. So why right brain practices? Why, right? The initial right brain, what we talked about, the brain stem, right brain initial trajectory is developed in the attachment relationship, okay? The attachment relationship. Us as practitioners, as adults, we're always gonna mimic that relationship with younger scholars. When we have that trust, when we have that relationship, we're gonna mimic, we're banking on attachment figures. So we're gonna go into that. So it's very important that we understand that. The right brain is connected to the body, to the autonomic nervous system, the ANS, and the hypothalamic pituitary axis that gets our whole body going. The scholar's ability to deal with stress and cope with conflict, process interpersonal crises, and feel safe in the world is profoundly dependent on early antecedent experiences, as we saw earlier in our earlier slide. So how the scholar navigates this process will be dependent on the teacher's ability to be in the moment and to help the scholar co-regulate. Change slide. So this is a normal thought process stress cycle of an individual. I want you to picture a student here. They go through a thought, physical response, behavior. For us, you see, maladaptive, thoughts, response, behavior. If we start seeing engaging in a right brain modality, the immediate thing that we do here is self-regulate. We know that the body is sometimes out of whack, so we help the scholar come to a level of homeostasis. We could go into our next slide. Then we go into processing the mind, allowing the scholar to process. This element of intensification, this phenomenon of intensification occurs right after an event. I'll give you one example just to bring it in the context of a K through 12. I would have some parents call me like, Mr. Alvarez, I caught my son smoking marijuana on this vape pen. He's a total drug addict. Oh my God, I just failed as a parent. Intensifying the situation, like, Mom, let's talk about it. Let's break down the situation. So we begin to deconstruct the situation. We begin to bifurcate, add elements of conversation there using right brain language. Then from there, we go into capacity building with both, with the scholar and with parent, if the parent's involved, or teacher. And this is more in how we could integrate the scholar back into the community. Your behavior was wrong, man. It wasn't the best. However, you're still in our family. It's that reintegrative shame, right? Whatever you did wasn't okay, but you're still okay with us. It's helping the scholar, bringing them back into a social cosm. And then again, closing in agreements. Agreements are very important. Having the end is very, very key, because scholars, again, do very well with 1, 2, 3, with understanding the beginning and the end. Okay, so this slide here is going to be one of the most technical slides of the whole presentation. But I think this is going to be the slide that's going to allow us to understand what I'm talking about a lot easier, especially in the body. We move away from like, hey, your stuff is like soft science, your stuff is psychobabble, to like, our stuff is biology, man. Our stuff is real. A lot of the times I start this conversation, if you have a brain and a heart, and these things are relevant to you, because this is what we do. This is human anatomy and human physiology. So I want you to think about a stressor. And the stressor, and all these 5 stressors assume the quality of a stressor. Okay, we have shame, stress, humiliation, conflict, and interpersonal. Shame and humiliation are a little bit different. Shame is you internalize I am defective, something is wrong with me. Humiliation is a lot more acute. Think about ridicule, someone making fun of you. Humiliation has a strong element to our body. So if these 5 elements are present, or something like this happens without intervention, and go into and we're seeing now our subcortical regions assess that situation. Without intervention, without a pro-social, an individual, an adult helping this child or this adult co-regulate, we go into a chain reaction. Sensory organs perceive a danger. Okay, we start seeing stress activation. We see HPA response. What do we see? The hypothalamus fires corticotropin release. So we see that happening, and we see adrenaline coming, anterior pituitary activation, and we see adrenal cortex releasing of cortisol. And when we see that, we see what we've heard now through the research is too much cortisol leads to cellular damage, leads to dendrite, degeneration. And us as educators, we want dendrites. That's how learning happens. So when a high level of dysregulation, a high level of crisis is occurring, this is happening in the body, making it almost impossible for you to retain academics or retain just learning. This is what's happening in the mind. Now what's happening in the body? So we go into a very different situation. So outcomes are mitigated through attachment responses. So I want you to think about increased sympathetic and increased parasympathetic, the gas and brake analogy. Okay, a scholar could engage in any of these both. So think about in a fight. Think about in a physical altercation in school. One scholar, when you're done, when you separate them, one scholar might be very still highly motivated, very animated, very angry, still very boisterous. And the other scholar might be just flat affect, sitting down, staring at the floor, maybe just tears coming out. They're both in a very highly dysregulated state. They're both manifesting or presenting it very differently based on their attachment. So we'll see one increased sympathetic and the other one with increased parasympathetic. And let's go into sympathetic. We see the dysregulation, rage, violence, fear, panic. The fight or flight, you see more of that, explosive, fragmented of self, explosive. You'll see a lot of that. Increased parasympathetic, you see more of the dysregulated shame, internalization, disgust, despair, dissociation, and collapse of self. When we go into that, what starts happening is restriction of non-essential functioning. And the body is amazing because it's consistently keeping us in survival mode. We see different elements that happen. Well, the body is getting ready for a fight here. So it restricts essential functionings, which is executive functioning, the ability for us to really learn. Our frontal lobes are significantly decreased. Well, there's not that much blood going into it. We have all the blood going into our extremities, our muscles, our to make sure that we're ready to run or fight. Our digestion is impacted. We're not really hungry at this time. Our body is getting ready for, it doesn't know if it's a 20-minute fight or a 3-day fight. Our digestion is impacted. We start seeing salivary glands impact. And I want you to ask yourself this question, or really just reflect back to scholars that are never hungry, right? Scholars that are like, nah, miss or not, mister, I'm not hungry. I don't eat here. Why is that happening? And this work through Stephen Porges, 2011, discovered that high frequency sound is significantly diminished and low frequency sound comes up. And we're like, okay, why does that happen? As a disciplinarian, as a dean, was very important because when you're out there in the quad or you're yelling a lot, right? And you're like, why isn't this person listening? So you start figuring out, well, he found out that there's there's muscles in your middle of your ear narrow during a moment of dysregulation, decreasing high frequency, and low frequency sound increases. Now, going back into evolution, this was important because, hunting, you would have to hear everything very quietly. It's very amazing what starts happening. And again, the last one is interpreting nonverbal cues. So nonverbal cues is a very, very important one. We can't really see what's happening with the other individual. We could go ahead and change slide. So we saw how important it is to understand when a scholar is dysregulated and feels disconnect. How and what could we do, in essence, to connect? This is a theme that we're developing in a conversation around the alliance, the restorative alliance, is a synchronization of emotional communication, right brain to right brain communication. The alliance begins with witnessing without judgment, which allows an individual, receiver, scholar, or adult to take in the risk in opening up, in essence, developing a vulnerable, co-regulating relationship. So right brain processes are dominant during a moment of emotional vulnerability. That's the most important thing. The scholar is not what is he or she hearing? It's how are you making him or her feel? Their micro expressions, their mirror neurons are very rapid at that point. The goal of the restorative alliance is forming the emotional working bond, essential for allowing participants to feel safe, build safety, and reach higher thinking regions. Again, we want to go into higher thinking regions so we could build complexity and narrative to that experience. Practitioners' ability to be present, attuned, and emotionally available during a pre-conversation helps the participant stay grounded and present during an interaction. And this is being in the moment. And that picture that you see on the side is through Dumas, D-U-M-U-S, Dumas's work on dual synchronization. We could go ahead and change slide. I think this is one of our last slides here, so we could go ahead and engage in questions. So building emotional intelligence. So we're seeing, we saw what the alliance and the restorative alliance, you see it on the left. And the alliance starts at a very core with helping build safety. And this is where we go into trainings and we teach administrators or principals how important it is that you stand outside and you greet students and you're waving and you're smiling and you're triggering those mirror neurons. How are you building safety? There's hundreds of times where scholars going like, yeah, mister, I knew I could come hit you up because you're always smiling. You're always safe, and I do. I'm always smiling. Hello, you're not. Like, it's consistently that. It comes into how do we form this restorative alliance? So it's nonverbal. They're going into mirror neurons. They're making sure how you're making them feel. Trust and building trust begins with these small titration of going in there. Let me see who's this person. And the last one goes into relationship, which is very difficult. On the right side, we see it happening. Our goal here is, in the beginning, we're building emotional empathy, okay? Through our relationship, we're building that. And through the relationship, we're trying to reach higher thinking regions of the brain to build cognitive empathy. So we're able to feel and connect brain and language and feel. That's very important for a scholar to build emotional intelligence and connect situations. We could go ahead and change slides. And how do we go into this? How do we have a robust right brain conversation? So if you could take a picture of this, or you could take out the slide and just make sure that you follow this when you're sitting with the student next time. You make sure that facial expressions are very dominant during that moment. So your micro expressions are triggering shame responses. If the student comes to you and like, miss, I need to talk to you about something, and you're like, wait, hold on, let me check my Instagram really quick. Those are triggering shame responses, or triggering elements like, this person doesn't trust me, or whoa, that was pretty tough, right? Those micro expressions are very important for you to monitor. Tempo of movement, how are you coming in and out of the conversation? Very important that you're like, okay, let's go ahead and stop here. This is what you're telling me? And you're going in and out. Incipient action, support plan. There's some scholars that you might push a little with the conversation and might have these eluding behaviors where they might take off and run. It's important to have a support plan. Someone else, like, hey, I'm going to talk to Junior. He might run or she might run. Just make sure that we have a plan for that. Auditory, prosodic, the decrescendos and crescendos of your emotional tone are on point, are very important. And this is very fundamental. Think about lullaby, right? When we're saying lullaby and we're singing lullaby to our babies, where the voice, the decrescendos are very soft. It's not like death metal, like lullaby, lullaby. Our little babies won't be going to sleep that way. So it's very important that we use the decrescendos and they're on point. So focus on reading and context statements. Pat Ogden, the work of Pat Ogden is amazing. So if you want to check out context statement, what does this mean? If the student, when you're talking to them about a moment or an experience and you see them crouch down and you're asking them, hey, I just saw that you just like kind of crouched down. What was that all about? You're adding awareness to that moment. So it's very important that you start touching that. You're looking at more subtle cues, at pupils. If you see them very dilated, like what's happening here, man? Posture and tone of voice. Again, nonverbal communication is being processed at subcortical levels, so beneath the words.
Thank you for learning with us today. Subscribe to the Resilience Impact channel for new trainings every month.